Good evening. My name is David Fromkin, and as director of the Frederick S. Pardee Center for the Study of the Longer Range Future, I welcome you to tonight's latest in the Pardee Distinguished Lecture Series. Our speaker tonight, as you know, is Paul Streeten, who served for many years as a luminary of the economics department of Boston University. When he left the active faculty, he resigned. He did not retire. At a time when I thought he had retired, I thought he had given an entirely new meaning to the word retired, completely upside down, because his life has been so active. He is the founder and chairman of the board of World Development, a consultant to the United Nations Development Program and to UNESCO, and he's been a special advisor to the World Bank. He is a prolific author and has the author of many books and articles. He, since 1990, has been a member of the team writing the annual human development reports that appear under the aegis of the United Nations, which are documents of fundamental importance in the field. His accomplishments as well as publications are so numerous that if I were to mention them here, there'd be no time for him to speak. So I shall stop here and welcome all of you here at Boston University to this lecture, and to Paul Streeten, welcome back.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Fromkin. I should begin by thanking you and Barry Goodwin and the Center for the Study of the Longer Range Future for having invited me. It's very nice to be back at Boston University, which, as you said, I left about 10 or 12 years ago. And I am very grateful to you for having forced me in a way to go outside my normal field, development economics, and think about the future and about technology and technological nightmares, as the title of these lectures indicates, which is completely outside my normal field. So I'm very, very grateful. The other thing is, you must excuse me for sitting down rather than standing here. If I were to stand, I would get even dizzier than I do now, and maybe would make even less sense. But I hope you'll forgive me for sitting down. Anyway, it seems to be quite a relatively informal gathering, and it's very nice. Well, perhaps I should begin by saying that I'm not a Luddite, which the title Technological Nightmares may suggest. Luddites, you remember, are those who, following Ned Ludd or General Ludd or King Ludd, were people who are known for irrational resistance to technical progress. Of course, they themselves were heavily affected by it. It goes back to the early 19th century, the late 18th century. And they were the ones who smashed machinery because it caused, I think the normal assumption is, and I think that is a wrong one, because they were against technical progress. They were not against technical progress. They were against having the machinery in factories, taking them out of their normal cottages in which they previously had been allowed to work. And that, of course, was not tolerated by the government. And many of them were punished for this. And by the year 1813, 24 Luddites had been hanged, which is not a very nice fate to suffer. So, but I'm not against technical progress, as you will see. I think we'll talk about that more fully. There were, of course, numerous movements. For instance, there was in the 70s in Cambridge a George Corey Society, the purpose of which was to put obstacles in the way of technical progress. And more recently, of course, you know, we remember the Unabomber who had also his own objections to it. And the indictment was not just to the unemployment that was caused by the new machinery, as it clearly was in the early days of the spinning jenny and the power loom. But the indictment goes beyond that. It is the depersonalization and the regimentation of work, the alienating replacement of community and conversation by television and net surfing. But one person's technological outrage is another's miraculous salvation. And of course, if we remember what the situation was like before the introduction and the growth of technology in the 19th and 20th century, we must remember that the work in the villages was horrible. It was the pre-industrial village was for most people a place of exhausting and unremitting subsistence labor, harnessing men, women, and children to the mind-numbing tasks of farm and household. So I'm very much aware of the benefits that technical progress has brought. It has raised not only productivity and wages, it has produced lots of new goods and improved old goods and services. It has produced a much longer life in good health, and half the things we spend our money on today were not even available in 1870. That is, from air travel to zip fasteners. The reduction in household drudgery, particularly for women, of course, is enormous, and I think one should welcome this. I do not believe, as the doomsayers on the environmental field seem to think, that technology inevitably leads to horrible pollution, raw material exhaustion, degradation of the environment, and to doom. There are prophets of doom, like Paul Ehrlich, who have predicted now, wrongly I think, for decades, that the world is coming to an end. I have different kinds of worries from those that the doomsayers of technology. And in fact, I have 6 worries or 6 concerns, to which I'll come after a somewhat perhaps excessively lengthy introduction. Maybe I won't reach it today. I don't know whether I'll reach it today or next week. The 6 concerns or 6 worries. But they are of a somewhat different kind for the ones that are usually quoted. The first Club of Rome report, if you remember, perhaps not to remember, but in 1972 it came out, was called Limits to Growth. And most of its predictions, in fact all of its predictions, are entirely wrong. They predicted that the world will come to an end more or less either because of excess pollution or because of raw material exhaustion or because of population growth. I remember, by the way, when I worked for a few years at the British Ministry of Overseas Development, we had a permanent secretary called Sir Andrew Cohen, and he always unconsciously and innocently coupled pest control with population control. These are the two concepts that we were very much concerned with, and we always tried to wean him from this. But population growth was one of the concerns, or excessive population growth, of these doomsayers in the first Club of Rome report called Limits to Growth. Now, there may be some of these things like global warming and desertification and so on, species exhaustion. They may have, I'm not going to discuss them, but I'm going to take somewhat different concepts, somewhat different concerns or worries. I would suggest that economic progress and technological progress does not necessarily have to take these horrible forms of pollution and raw material exhaustion. Now, there are some people, you may have come across them, I don't know if they still exist. In my earlier years, they were quite vocal, who advocate zero economic growth in order to meet the challenge of the environment and all that. I think zero economic growth does not really solve. If you believe in what is called hard sustainability, that you think that certain raw materials will be inevitably exhausted after a certain time, then zero growth doesn't solve your problem. If you want hard sustainability, that means that you want to maintain your stock of exhaustible raw materials, you have to be not in favor of zero growth, but instead of zero consumption. That's to say, we must all abolish all forms of consumption, which would mean, of course, the end of the human race. And that I don't think is what these people want. Hard sustainability is, in fact, I think, nonsense. And many forms of growth, many forms of economic growth have taken forms which have not been either raw material exhaustion or heavily polluting. So we have basically four options of growth. We can either, if we assume that growth is accompanied, that economic growth is accompanied by not only the production of goods, but also the production of bads, whether you call bads pollution or any other bad effects of it. And the two are complementary, although you can choose to some extent how they go together. You can opt for less slower growth, which of course simply postpones the day of exhaustion of materials. Fewer goods, therefore, and fewer bads. That is one option. The second option would be for the production of more anti-bads, let's say, like scrubbers, which prevent the evolution, and with the resources reallocated to the production of anti-bads. Whether that shows up as more growth or as less growth depends on your accounting convention. Whether you count, for instance, anti-bads as necessary conditions of production, in which case they don't add to the productive process, or whether as net additions, in which case they may look like faster growth, differently composed. Now, the third option would be to opt for even faster growth, even more goods and faster growth, to compensate for the bads that you produce with the goods. And the fourth option, which would be my own preference, would be different kinds of goods, with fewer of the characteristics that cause the bads, like slower but also less polluting cars, like hydrogen fuel-driven automobiles, for instance. Now, these are the four options. There are many quite innocuous and quite harmless innovations, technological innovations, which are neither raw material exhausting nor polluting, and which advance economic growth quite considerably. The first Club of Rome, you remember, was called Limits to Growth. And there was a subsequent report of the Club of Rome which was called No Limits to Learning. That is to say, they said that we can, in principle, advance the frontiers of learning indefinitely. Although there are, if I have time, I'll come towards the end talking about why there may, in fact, be some limits to learning, particularly time spent on educating people and so on. But for the moment, let us remember that many technological innovations and technical inventions are quite environmentally benign. Information technology on the whole, I think, is one of them. There are a whole long list which I won't, but I'll give you one or two illustrations. For instance, when I was a young man, going to the dentist was extremely painful. It was a long time ago. Now, painless dentistry is a very pleasant form. Maybe in the future, children and young people won't have any cavities at all, because whatever it is, fluorized water, whatever, will be eliminating the problem of cavities. Heart bypass surgery, magnetic resonance imaging, for which the Nobel Prize has just been awarded to do medical people. The new varieties of wheat and rice, these are all, the word processor, the fuel cell, which I've already mentioned, these are all innovations and inventions which do not exhaust, don't make heavy demands on raw materials, and which are not polluting. So that we can have technical progress which does not suffer from the disadvantage that some people attribute to all economic growth. There are, of course, some technologies which are more controversial. And in particular, and I'm no great expert on this, and I'm sure amongst you there must be many who know much more about this. One of the most controversial new technologies, of course, is nanotechnology, the one which was discovered in 1991, the nanotubes, when carbon is vaporized as a gas, such as helium, and allowed to cool slowly. It forms what are called buckyballs, after Buckminster Fuller, or another term is fullerenes, because apparently the structure of these molecules resembles the geodesic dome that Richard Buckminster Fuller had invented. That is why they are called that. Now, there was a conference last month in in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And that concept, I read in the papers, as some of you may have done, which was about the construction of a 60,000 miles high elevator to carry the cargo into space, into the space ships. And these high elevators would be constructed out of nanotubes, which are much stronger than steel and much thinner and smaller. And apparently the keynote address to this conference in September was given by Arthur Clarke, you know, the science fiction writer to whom I refer again in later context, who addressed the meeting via satellite. And his novel, which I haven't read, called The Fountains of Paradise in 1978, predicted such a space elevator. I have read a book called Prey by Michael Crichton, which is about the destructive possibility of these nanorobots. In fact, they invade, in the novel, they invade and take the control of human bodies, and it's a horrible story. There is a Bill Joy, you know, who recently resigned from the Sun Microsystems. He recently left it. He was a chief scientist for a long time. And he published in the year 2000 a book, an article in Wired, in a magazine called Wired, which was entitled Why the Future Doesn't Need Us, with a subtitle, long subtitle, Our Most Powerful 21st Century Technologies, Robotics, Genetic Engineering, and Nanotechnology are threatening to make humans an endangered species. They are so powerful they can spawn whole new classes of accidents and abuses. Now, he really thinks that this nanotechnology, which can completely go out of hand, and the gray goo which it produces can produce a phalanx of nanomachines, something between a computer program and a form of virus or life. And they can, in principle, create nanomachines which run out of raw material, and for raw material you can eventually lead either the planet or actually, according to some forecasts, the whole universe. It's like the story of, the poem of the Sorcerer's Apprentice. If you get the process started, the self-replicating nanobots escape, can you turn the darn thing off? The message of that novel, Prey, by Michael Crichton, is that biotechnology in the 21st century is as dangerous a technology as nuclear technology was in the 20th century. I guess the equivalent novel, which I read a long time ago, was by Neville Shute, called On the Beach. There are people who deny that nanotechnology is as dangerous as Bill Joy and Michael Crichton predict. On the other hand, there are others who agree with him. There's a man called Eric Drexler, in a book called Engines of Creation, who fears that nanotechnology could lead to a future in which self-assembling and self-replicating nanorobots are in control of the world. They could produce, according to Drexler and Crichton and Bill Joy, they could produce they could reduce the biosphere to grey goo. And Bill Joy thinks that nanotechnology is so dangerous that we should completely abandon it. Against this, there's a man called Richard Smalley, a passionate advocate of nanotechnology, who said to Bill Joy, I say, get up and turn on the lights, Bill, because this nanobot future is just a silly nightmare. On the other hand, the Prince of Wales, the Prince of Wales in England, Britain, is worried by the report of grey goo and is very much concerned about nanotechnology. So I don't know where you will come out on this one. Opinions are divided. There are three types of technology, apart from the three types that I mentioned before, a different kind of categorization. One that is frightening from the start. When the first atom bomb was detonated in Alamogordo in New Mexico in 1945, everybody knew that something terrible has been released on the world. Potential for destruction is enormous. And there's a need for regulating that type of technology. On the other hand, there is also completely benign, or almost completely benign technology. And I would have thought that apart from the digital divide, the drawbacks that information technology divides the world into the haves and the have-nots, and the have-nots do not have access, On the whole, information technology seems to be fairly harmless. There are threats to privacy, and which I'll come to in a moment, very soon, and there may be a minimum regulation required for that reason. And thirdly, there are some technologies that are in between those that are obviously worrisome and obviously benign. And I think, apart from nanotechnology, biotechnology, we will have to say a bit more, falls into that third category, where people are divided about the degree of control that is needed. Now, I once organized a conference in Sri Lanka of the Society for International Development, in which I invited is it Sir Arthur Clarke? I don't know if it's Sir or not. Arthur Clarke, who was a very distinguished science fiction writer, and a man who's taking entirely the opposite view, Ivan Illich, who I think died earlier this year. But he was also a very, very articulate and very great anti-technology man. And I wanted them to debate. And it was a very interesting debate, because Ivan Illich, who then still was an ordained minister of the Catholic Church, he said, after Arthur Clarke had described in very glowing terms the future that is entirely run by robot and everything will be done by machines and human beings will be completely freed of any kind of work, he said, well, he was then an ordained priest of the Catholic Church. Ivan Illich said, I wouldn't like to make love to a robot. But that seemed odd for a Catholic priest to say, but he has left the church, of course, and he has actually, I believe, fallen in love. But since then, I've read a recent chapter by Howard Rheingold on virtual reality and teledildonics, who predicts we shall be literally embracing technology. The technology will be a substitute for human lovemaking. There's a British writer called Martin Rees, who is a professor in Cambridge University, Cambridge, England, and who is Britain's Astronomer Royal, and who has bet $1,000 that an instance of bioterror or bioerror, as he calls it, it could be an error, it could be imposed by a terrorist, will take 1 million lives before the year 2020. And then he also has a bet. No, he hasn't got a bet. That is the bet that he has. He says that there is a 50-50 chance that humanity will survive the 21st century. And he's not a doomsmonger. He's a very sensible guy. In fact, his book in this country is called Our Final Hour. In England, it's called Our Final Century. And he wanted actually himself, he wanted a question mark. But his publishers, both in England and America, prohibited him from putting in a question mark because they thought it would catch a wider audience. And he's a very, very sensible man. I've read the book, and it's a very balanced view of the future. But he has this 1 million deaths and 50-50 chance of survival. Now, I don't want to scare you, because I want to report on having been asked by David Franklin to bend my ment to the longer-term future, having looked some of the literature on this field. There is an important distinction, which not many people realize, between a prophet and a forecaster. And just before this meeting, David Franklin told me that the endower of the center, Pardee, himself was a forecaster. So I wonder whether he was also a bit of a prophet. But you remember the prophet Jonah in the Bible didn't know the difference between the two, because when he predicted the production of Nineveh, because the people had fallen into bad habits and didn't behave themselves, but then they did reform their ways when they were told that they would be destroyed by God, he was very angry with God because he thought he had made the wrong prophecy, the wrong forecast. But forecast is different from prophecy, because the function of a good prophet is to mend people's ways, to make them improve themselves and behave better. But Jonah was furious with God. He mistook the function of a prophet for that of a forecaster. On the other hand, it seems to me that prophets of doom, if they know that they are prophets and that their function is to improve people's way of behaving, have it very easy, because they cannot in a way be wrong. Either their forecasts turn out to be true, in which case they can always say, well, I told you so, or their forecasts turn out to be false, although I must say the first Club of Rome reporters don't quite fall into that category. They can say, well, people have mended their ways and have improved their ways, and therefore we have fulfilled our functions as prophet. Now, there are, as Martin Rees has said, technological errors and technological terror. I'll have to say a little bit about each. Error, of course, is from the Titanic in 1912, via the Challenger in 86 to the Columbia in 2003. These are errors. 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, explosion of a chemical factory in Toulouse in 2001, the sunken tanker Prestige off the coast of Spain, like the Cordes Valdez, oil spills, etc. These are technical errors. Before the errors, not so much technological, but disasters were inflicted on the world by natural forces, floods, earthquakes, volcanoes, and hurricanes. But now we have more concern with human agency. And therefore we have, still at the introduction of all this, we have to talk about technological discoveries. It's interesting to note, that how blind people were to the implications of their discoveries. Ernest Rutherford, the greatest nuclear physicist of his time, dismissed as moonshine the practical relevance of nuclear energy, of ever finding any kind of practical application. It was pure theoretical. The pioneers of radio regarded wireless transmission as a substitute for the telegraph, ship-to-shore communication, but never thought it would become a medium of mass entertainment, broadcasting to a very wide public. Neither the great mathematician Johnny von Neumann nor the IBM founder Thomas J. Watson envisaged the need for more than a few computers in the entire country. They thought that it would all be just a few computers would need. We didn't think of it that every household would have at least one, and we have in our household, I think now, at least 6 or 7 different computers. Now, there are certain technological problems, this is still my way of introduction, which I describe as not so much wrong or misguided or misleading as that we are suffering from success, or as some people describe it, a second-generation problem. You solve one set of problems. The scientific confidence, asserts that there is a solution to every problem. That is, our scientific confidence asserts that the solution to every problem. But experience shows that there is a problem to every solution, and indeed very often more than one problem to every solution. And there are those that produce what are called second-generation problems in technology. The rapid growth of industry, this brings me back to development economics, the rapid growth of industry showed up agriculture as a slow course, the need to invest in agriculture and to do something about the new varieties. That did eventually follow. We had a problem to that solution. We had the new varieties of wheat and rice. But they produced another set of second-generation problems relating to plant diseases, to inequality, of the impact, to unemployment, etc. Equally, of course, the great problem about which so many people were worried for a long time, the population explosion to which I've already referred to, was caused by something that we should all welcome, the rapid and effective reduction of mortality, without the corresponding rapid and effective reduction in fertility. We introduced modern death rates into societies which still had an ancient birth rates, and that produced the population growth. But nobody can have wished not to have reduced the mortality rates in some people. So that was another case of second-generation problem. Now, of course, with the discovery of quite effective, and the discovery and the adoption of quite effective methods of birth control, family planning, etc., we have the problem about which many more people begin to think now of aging societies, of declining birth rates, and the social and political problems of a world in which for many people their only kinsmen and kinswomen would be their their ancestors. It would be a world in which more lonely people, without siblings, uncles, aunts, and cousins. That is the one child or even less than one child kind of society. So these are problems created by a first set of solutions to one set of problems, which create another set of problems later on. We recently read again about, some years ago we talked about jobless growth, and now we talk about a jobless recovery, where the recovery is not accompanied by the creation of any job, instead by the reduction of jobs. But again, in principle, you see, jobless growth and jobless recovery should be welcome, because it means that productivity grows ahead of work, and since most people don't terribly enjoy the kind of work they have to do, that would be a benefit if the spread were even. Of course, the fact that some people are completely unemployed and don't have access to resources is not so welcome, is deplorable. The education in many developing countries, of course, has led to the influx from the country to the towns, and from the towns abroad, the so-called brain drain, professional education, professional manpower, the emigration. But again, one wouldn't want not to have the people educated. I mean, it does create second generation problems. Equally, I think the currently advocated outward-looking, export-oriented policies in many developing countries, I think many people who advocate passionately exports and free trade forget that in most cases the successful exports were built on periods of closing off, of inward looking, of building your foundation, your infrastructure, and your industrial technological base of inward looking policies. And then you can open up if you do that properly. There's a book by Edward Tenner, which is called Why Things Bite Back, Technology at the Range of Unintended Consequences. There are, I call it something else from what we previously talked about. It is really counterproductive, not in terms of other results, but in terms of the own aim of the whole technology. That is something quite different from the ones that we've talked so far. And that is again very odd. For instance, examples that Tenner gives in his book is the safest part of the New Jersey Turnpike apparently is the crowded metropolitan portion north of New Brunswick. The more rural South Jersey section has twice its accident rate, because congestion compels vigilance. Congestion. And this is the principle of the opposite effect. The internet has also followed the law of unintended consequences. The net, by the way, was originally an effort by I don't know whether you've heard or whether you remember, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which has recently come into the news because it was the agency of the Pentagon which was under the direction of Poindexter of Watergate fame, which was supposed to find a way for users of computers in one place to communicate with computers in other places. And that was part of the internet of the Defense Advanced Research Projects. They recently came into the news because they advocated futures markets in terrorism, and that caused a lot of both pro and anti articles in the papers and quite a big stir. But let me give you some examples of the counterproductive effect in terms of its own aim, what the whole aim of the technology itself was to achieve. It is not side effects like nuclear power that one deplores, but it is really achieving the opposite of what it intended to have, what it was originally intended. Perhaps the most obvious example, of course, is congestion caused by the motor car. The motor car, which is supposed to bring us faster to certain places, now has produced blockages and congestion and delays. You move faster on foot and even faster on a bicycle than by car, say between my old college, Balliol in Oxford, and Morden Bridge. I don't know, maybe they've reformed it since I've left, but in the time when I was still there, it was almost impossible. It took much longer by car than it took on foot. Medicines and hospitals, of course, called what again Ivan Illich has pointed to what is called iatrogenic illnesses or diseases. And recently I read an article in the Wall Street Journal which was called How to Prevent the Hospital from Making You Sicker. And I remember on one occasion when we lived in Sussex, my wife going into hospital with one minor ailment and coming out with 5 major ailments caused by the hospital infection and letting her drop off a stretcher, etc., and similar mishaps. There are some people who think, and sometimes I'm inclined to think the same, that school and universities make us more stupid rather than more intelligent, don't educate us. You remember Orwell once said, George Orwell, this is the sort of thing that you could learn only at the university. Prisons produce criminals. 63% of freed prisoners are jailed within 3 years of serious crime. And prisons make for more prisoners. And of course they cause AIDS, but that's another matter. There are more recidivists than cured criminals in America's prisons. We know that agriculture ruins the soil, that irrigation produces salination, etc. Filters of water purification turn out to be breeding grounds of bacteria and cause cancer, as we know. Injuries tripled, apparently. I must take these facts on trust. Injuries tripled. Helmets and other protective gear have made football more dangerous than rugby. Neck and spine injuries tripled after the debut of football helmets. Antibiotics, we all know, of course, have produced the strains that are resistant to antibiotics and that means, of course, a more serious attack on illnesses. Tourism in many places has killed tourism, devaluation worsened the balance. But there are numerous other type of examples that I could give you. So those are a few ways which I wanted to mention by way of introduction to the whole question of my real 5 or 6 concerns that I'll come to now or perhaps next week when I talk about these technological nightmares, which are not just nightmares from which you wake up, but which have some real component of concern or worry. Well, the first one which I want to begin, I call, I'm not sure that's a very good title, the need for a cultural revolution caused by the information revolution, information technology. When in the old days, when you had, say, 8 or 10 ditch diggers and somebody supervising them from above, he could see to it that they were doing their work, and if somebody slacked, they could tick him off and he could tell him to do his job. When you nowadays have a computer operator in a bank, it's no good having him supervised because the supervisor might just as well do the work himself. So he has to assume the responsibility. He has to assume a different attitudes from the ditch diggers who probably would have slacked had there not been a supervisor. It requires something that pays attention to things that economists don't pay very much attention to, but which is very important, which is attitudes as opposed to skills and aptitudes. Skills and aptitudes can in a way be measured, or at least the input into training can be measured. But attitudes are much more difficult to measure, and therefore economists have tended to neglect them. But what kind of attitudes are called for by the information technology? And the advanced technology that the information technology has produced, that means the smaller number of skilled people supply their services over a wider range, producing what economists call the winner-takes-all effect, where only the best do well and those lucky few command enormously large incomes. This has been so far the case in sports, in business and entertainment. The invention, for instance, of the phonograph has done this for singers. Instead of having to be bound by a present audience, you can, by making records or discs, you can reach the masses. The invention of the motion picture has done it for actors, for film stars, and proliferating communications information technology may do the same for many other occupations. What is the effect on employment of the information revolution? Now there again, I put to you, as you will discover, No answers, but many questions and problems that I've come to ask myself in the course of preparing for these lectures. What is the effect on employment? Does the information revolution mean that high skills are going to be more rewarded and the low skills? Two questions, really. One is, what are low skills due to? Are low skills the result of genetic endowment given by nature? Or can they in principle be augmented and increased by training and by nurture? And the second one, what is going to be the demand for low skills in this new information technology society? Are they going to be reduced? Are we going not to need any? Or is it going to be increased? I don't know the answer to either of these questions. The Department of Labor, I think, in the US predicts a large increase in the demand for people with low skills, people like health workers, nurses, childcare workers, special education teachers, gardeners, plumbers, valet parkers, etc. I mean, there are many types of activities. Admittedly, many of them in the public sector, which is not a very good reputation these days, and they are not very well paid, of course, and we may have to reform this. But according to the Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics, many of these jobs are likely to grow faster than the high-skilled jobs. Others, of course, may say that this is not so, that these low-skilled jobs are going to be eliminated by machines. Machines can take their place, and these people will no longer be wanted. I've been rereading for the second time for these lectures a very interesting novel by Kurt Vonnegut called Player Piano, which describes a future nightmare society, a dystopia, or Jeremy Bentham called it a catotopia, in which the divine right of machines, efficiency, organization, management, has triumphed, and there's a very large underclass of low IQ people who don't have jobs, who are basically unemployed, or they have makeshift jobs which are not highly respected. And there's a small group of highly skilled, high IQ people. Everybody's measured according to their IQs, and they are allocated to the highly paid, well looked after managerial class. The unemployed don't suffer from deprivation. They are looked after, they have plenty of goodies, but they lack what John Rawls calls perhaps the most important primary good, which is self-respect, respect for the contribution they make to social life. And eventually, of course, they revolt, although interesting enough, the revolt is led by one of the high Q, by 2 or 3 of the high Q people. I think they are not even capable of revolting themselves. The interesting thing in this novel is what deprived the underclass of self-respect was the fact that it was an equality of opportunity society, a complete meritocracy. Everybody got to their jobs entirely deserved by their IQ. Who became a manager, and who became outside the managerial era. If you were to allocate these jobs through lottery or by the accident of birth, there would have been no problems with self-respect of the underclass. So this is again our problem, as I said at the moment, with jobless growth. Is it, in fact, the result of genetic endowment? And I'll come to that when I come to the Frankenstein nightmare. I will talk much more about that question of whether it is the IQ which is caused by genetic endowment, or is it a matter of training and skills and that you can acquire after a while. And for those of us who are not Luddites, another question, of course, is whether only the unskilled jobs can be replaced by computers. But it may also be that some of the more skilled ones, the highly skilled ones, for instance, there has been a computer program recently which enables you to make medical diagnoses, which previously were made, of course, by by doctors, highly skilled and trained doctors, qualified physicians. If it is the case that computers can take the work of highly skilled people too, then again would produce quite a different result. It might lead to a lessening of the gap in wages and rewards and remuneration of the skilled and the unskilled. So I don't know. I think the question is, as I said, there are two questions which one has to answer. One, can these skills in principle be acquired through training and through a good environment, family, schooling, etc., or are they given by the genetic lottery in the game? And is it only the skilled and only the unskilled who are going to be penalized, or is it also the skilled? So this is the first question, the first part, the first concern that I was raising, the question of what does the information technology mean from the point of view of attitudes, cultural differences, and social development. Is it going to be a society in which we are having, say, the genetic endowment rewarded, only IQs, or is it one where we're going to have also, say, for instance, that effort would be a much better society where effort is rewarded, however low the achievement, the IQ, rather than the genetic endowment or the one acquired through nature. I think I will perhaps stop here, because next time I will come to talk about four or five, actually it is, other kind of nightmares. One will be the electronic nightmare, which is concerned with privacy. One will be the Frankenstein nightmare, so-called, which will be concerned with biotechnology and neuroscience. That'll be quite a long discussion. One will be what I call the terrorist's atom bomb in the suitcase, which is, of course, a bioterror, not a bioerror. And the fifth one will be cyber terror and cyber error, things that can be interfering with the network of computer technology, say by directing the flows of control of water or electricity, etc. And then sixthly, I'll come to what I call our final experiment, which is concerned with, again, slightly science fiction subjects, like, I don't know if any of you have read Greg Brentford's novel Cosmo, where you create whole universes and destroy whole universes, possibly. But I think we have now time for critical comments, questions, and any other comments, even approving comments are welcome. Yes, Eva.
I want to follow up a little on some of your thoughts about skills, because when you talked about low-skill jobs, you mentioned, for example, childcare and healthcare, which certainly can be done badly by low-skilled people, but to have them done well may require not what we normally think of as skills, but special characteristics. My brother is a doctor who has been involved in the development of computer diagnosis, and his reason for being involved in that is that he is aware that in the modern world with so much information available, doctors have to act like computers. They have to be able to gather huge amounts of data and weigh off probabilities and so forth. His feeling is that if computers can do that, doctors can go back to acting like human beings, where the skills involved are not the kind of IQ thing that was involved in the science fiction story you spoke about, but in fact human qualities. And so the question of skill might be turned by the technology revolution into questions of human qualities such as kindness and caring and that kind of thing.
That's right. But they are, I mean, first of all, I may have chosen the examples wrongly, and it may be high skills as such, but kindness and caring are qualities that often go with quite low IQs, wouldn't you say? I think it doesn't necessarily require. Yeah, they can. They don't have to.
But
no,
they don't go with high wages, and this may be a problem of our whole society.
That's right. That's what I was going to say. That's what I was trying to say. That low rewards for some of these things that require qualities which are quite different from the ones that we tend to reward highly are not very highly rewarded in our society. And many of them fall into the public sector, of course, and that is another reason why, which is nowadays not in very good repute, and another reason why this is so. But if one could mend that, I think that would be part of the solution of this first set of problems that I'm trying to go through. But I agree. Yeah.
Hi, I've read a lot recently about those on high power creating technologies which would in fact lower IQ, or like basically the idea to keep people docile by like not allowing them to know as much as those who are above. And I was reading that the education system was originally devised so that the public wouldn't be as educated as those in control, except for the privileged ones, and then it becomes the underprivileged to have a lower IQ, and the privileged have the higher IQ. I also recently read something that said that China did this study on fluoride in the water and proved that it over time lowered your IQ. And then there's also the fact that LSD research in the 70s was cut off, but then there was one research that, I mean, this was probably completely wrong, but it said that it raised the IQ, and that a lot of the problems in public schools were in fact problems that were deliberate when public schools were created. And I was just wondering what you thought about the hierarchy of what responsibility do the privileged have to the underprivileged, and should they be keeping their IQs higher so they can participate in the world, I guess.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't disagree with anything you said, but I wondered if most of the comments are applicable primarily to an adversarial society like the United States, and less to a European type of social system. It seems to me there is a lot more equality in, for example, Germany, which I'm sort of familiar with.
In what, sorry?
In Germany?
Yeah.
There is less motivation to rise beyond your level of competence. In other words, people are satisfied and very happy, it seems to me, working as production workers at Mercedes because they get the same respect, and maybe, or even garbage collectors in Berlin, which is a very desirable job, I hear, because it's very high paying. But they get respect, and they also get very decent salaries. And there is a cooperative spirit. I happened a couple of years ago to spend a month visiting Mercedes, BMW, Siemens, and a few Porsche. It is so different from American factories. They cooperate. It works like a football team where you may have the quarterback who gives the orders, and you have I'm not a big football expert, but you have the backs who carry the ball and get the glory for making the touchdowns, and you have the brute force at the line which does their job, but everybody does what they can as a team. Here, in this country, the person who is the babysitter, for example, maybe doing, or the mother who stays at home to take care of the children, is doing maybe an extremely important job, but in this society is not as respected. So I wondered whether the problem, the nightmare that you visualize, isn't more of an American nightmare or a nightmare of this type of society, and whether there's any prospect of the European type social system surviving in competition with the American system.
Well, the common view, of course, is that the semi-skilled and unskilled in Europe get those who remain in employment get higher wages, but there is much more unemployment. Whereas in the United States, they get lower wages, but on the whole, until recently, there is a higher level of employment.
But the unemployed get very good benefits in Germany.
Yeah, they do. Good what? Good,
very good benefits.
Good benefits.
The unemployed get pretty much the same benefits that somebody who is still working gets.
I know, but there is the problem, which I mentioned in the context of Kurt Vonnegut's play A Piano, that there is an important aspect to employment which has very little to do with, which has nothing to do with money or with income or with contributing to production, but which is the recognition aspect, the kind of, and you feel, even though you get your basic needs are looked after, you don't feel recognized by the society if you don't have a job, unless it's a temporary unemployment. And I think in some European countries, unemployment is very long term. But I agree. I mean, I know in a sense more about Europe than I know about the United States. And I agree that there are important cultural differences. But I would have thought that some of these impacts of the information technology will also affect different cultures in much the same way as the United States. But I agree. I think there are important differences. I agree. Yes, Bruce. Have you got a
very
microphone?
Wonderful, in fact, account of the technological nightmares that perhaps face.
Well, I've actually only come to the introduction. I haven't come yet to the nightmare.
But I'd like to raise the following.
Yeah.
Whether, in fact, there's a little bit of the wolf, the boy who cried wolf, in that these stories about the machine or some version of a machine rising up in rebellion against human beings go back to the Golem in the sort of late Middle Ages, comes on through Frankenstein, which you'll talk about next time. You find it in the very name Robot. That was the name of the Czech play called R.U.R. and the Revolt of the Robots, which meant worker. And I guess what I'm tempted to say is that, of course, any one of the, this may come true. But the fact is that over 2 or 3 centuries, they've not. So maybe we can keep going with some hope that they won't be realized. And that all of this deflects us from the real problem about technology, which is that ultimately it is not the machines, it's the human beings that we need to think about. And that throws it into the arena of the political and the social. Because are there ways in which technology could advance the kinds of political and social decisions that we make? Now, there are efforts to do this mimicking science. I mean, the RAND Corporation for a while thought you could run the Vietnam War just on the basis of computer scenarios and such. But is there some way in which, for example, the computer revolution allows for groups to form across the globe, such as NGOs, such as non-governmental organizations, that have not limited parochial interests at heart, or less so at least, but broader concerns about humanity? So, in other words, that we need to be imaginative and how we use technology, as well as in the ways in which we invent it. I'll rest there.
I think that's a very good way in which I should perhaps end my talk. I quite agree. I think it's. But there is interaction, isn't there, between the human and the social factors and the sheer technology. And there are effects of the sheer technology which can be quite beyond any human agency. Like these very, very gloomy things that were in novels like Cosm, by which I've mentioned, which I'll come to next time, which in a sense are both unforeseeable, unpredictable, and, I don't know, maybe some people do predict them, but unless you stop progressing, unless you stop applying the technology, sort of inevitable. Yeah.
I'm not sure if you're going to get to this point in one of your further lectures, but do you think it's nightmarish, the idea of manipulating our germline and changing our genetic makeup?
Genetic makeup.
Right.
Yeah.
Like in the
well, that is, of course, what I'll come to next time. Yes,
you will come
very
to
much a question of the engineer, the opposite of the old eugenics movement, improving your children by genetic implants, making children of 5 foot high and bald parents grow lots of hair and becoming 6-footers. That can be done in principle by genetic engineering. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
With the advancements of the Human Genome Project, do you think that that is nightmarish or not?
No, well, it can, yes. It would lead to nightmares, which I'll talk about next time. Okay. Yes, it can. That's a very, very important and good point, and I think it can lead to nightmares. Although, again, I mean, the question that puzzles me and must puzzle anybody who thinks about these things is, why should one be concerned about intentionally bringing about results that nowadays happen by sheer chance and arbitrarily? I mean, our genetic endowments are now kind of quasi-arbitrarily determined. But if we then make them intentionally certain things, then we object to it. Many people object, for instance, to genetic engineering of that kind. But at the moment, it's just a matter of chance what happens. And why do we object to intentional action and don't object to the kind of unintentional, arbitrary way? Do you see? But I'll come to that next time. Yeah.
I think I'm supposed to go next. I hear a lot from the audience, much less from the speaker, of things that I wonder are impressions, but false impressions. So, for example, this whole idea that there's going to be more and more low IQ people making less and less money, I'm not sure that's how technology is really going. So, for example, when I see Arnold Schwarzenegger, I say to myself, well, this is the kind of guy that's making all the money. You know, there's a few actors in Hollywood who aren't very good and they're making all the money. But when we think about it, I wonder if there aren't more actors than ever before making more money. Look at the opportunity for actors on the vast numbers of, yes, low quality, low culture television programs that are made. There's lots and lots of local theaters. The same with musicians. It's true that there are a few so-called musicians that make lots of money, and I have to say I'm a snob about music. But there are lots and lots of orchestra where people are playing and making some amounts of money, lots of low-budget recordings where people are being paid. And it would be very nice to have data about these things so that we could see indeed whether technology is concentrating wealth in the hands of a few. Another matter is wars. I wonder if wars are getting more destructive or less destructive. I mean, World War II, I suppose 27 million people were killed in the Soviet Union alone. Probably there were about 40 million killed during World War II. We haven't had anything like that since then. So some data, hard-headed data, would be nice in this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking a little bit about this whole flow of technology, and I couldn't help but think back the arguments of the Luddites and others who were concerned that machines would totally replace the need for human work. and then arguments about de-skilling that came later. Think about the Malthus being driven by the problem of the limitations on agricultural output, and start putting at least some part of this technological movement that we've had over the last 2-3 centuries, say a couple, and I think start applying, say, the Human Development Index, which you've been so influential in creating. And the net result over this period certainly has been enormous increases in life expectancy, in literacy, in opportunities for political participation, and so on. And so if you ask me, would I rather be here in 2003, or would I prefer the technology of 1776 when Adam Smith was writing The Wealth, or 1870 in the middle? I find myself being relatively optimistic. There's a lot of gains that have been gotten. And almost every one of these things that probably have given us net gains, there's been side effects, and the unintended consequences that you raise, Paul, are certainly terribly important. We should be aware. But yet it seems, at least to this point, that society has found ways to take advantage of the benefits and at least deal with the major problems or minimize them. That's the Pollyanna view today.
Right.
I think that the problems you selected are very interesting, but as a chemical engineer, I think of fusion, and I wondered how this would change your priorities. In other words, I probably reflecting the fact that I have worked in microelectronics from the very beginning, and it has been astonishing what has been developed in the last 40 years in that area. But I wouldn't be surprised if in 40 years we have fusion, which is unlimited energy, the energy of the sun. With unlimited energy, you can solve a lot of problems. In other words, you really can do things that we don't think of now. Transmutation of elements is very possible in fusion. You can start producing scarce materials. In other words, I can envision somewhere in the next 40 or 100 years, unlimited resources. Now, this might lead to population explosions, but will it lead to less conflict? If you have, or don't you think that these technological developments are conceivable? They're certainly conceivable. There's no question about that. Whether they will turn out to be practical is something else. But won't this change the long-term future, and have you thought about this?
Oh yes, no, I haven't. No, I think you're quite right. I mean, fusion would presumably solve, as I understand it, the energy problem for the world as a whole, without any of the undesirable results of global warming or any of the other things. But no, I think that's true. I mean, my impression is, and I mean, you know much more about this than I do, that it would be. I'm not sure. I mean, I've read a bit more about the fuel cells and isn't that an alternative? How in the hydrogen economy?
But what a fuel cell does basically is simply a fuel cell, and I know a little bit about it. It's chemical engineering. Yeah. It just doubles the efficiency of an internal combustion engine. It avoids the Carnot cycle, but it doesn't provide unlimited energy. It's just a much more efficient way, of course, but only a 100% more efficient way of burning fuel.
Yeah.
So I don't see that as revolutionary at all. That's a refinement.
And you think it's going to happen in the next, 50 years?
Fusion?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not an expert on this, although I do have a master's degree in nuclear engineering too, for what it's worth, in 1955. But I understand that in those days, if they could achieve 3 microseconds of fusion, that was a very important event. From people I know now, they say that within a year we will have 10 seconds of fusion. That sounds trivial, but that is a little bit like in 1960, we made 4 transistors on a chip and celebrated the integrated circuit. Now they have 64 million on a chip. So in other words, once you have begun to move up the line to 10 seconds, I could imagine pretty soon it'll be hours and then years.
At one time I thought of giving these 2 talks the title technological dreams and nightmares, and the dreams would be good things, and the nightmares would be bad things. And had I done that, then certainly fusion would have been amongst amongst the dreams. But I don't know, for some reason I found that there wasn't enough material about the dreams and too much material about the nightmares, and I confined it to the nightmares.
I had a question about development economics in some ways, about distribution and equity. From a lot of what the discussion you in your talk, technology with a very big T was being talked about, technology all over. And it struck me that, I mean, you talked about how technology can change distribution with, the geeks taking over the world, the high IQ people taking over the world. But technology happens in worlds which already have distribution problems. And for example, with genetic modification or genes, the reason some people get concerned when chance is taken away is that chance has a notion of fairness in it. Whereas if technology is only given to those who can get it, then you take away at least even that notion of fairness by strengthening the hands of the quote-unquote haves. My question was that what is the role of equity in turning certain technologies into nightmares?
What is
what is the role of equity and distribution when technology happens in an already skewed distribution, in an already unequitable situation? Well, the nightmare can be compounded.
I think that's a very, very good question. I think, for instance, different technology have different effects. I mean, in principle, the eugenic so-called revolution, I mean, the kind of genetic engineering, should make if you can implant, as it were, desirable characteristics like intelligence and others, should make distributions more equal, less unequal than they are at the moment. On the other hand, other types of technology can make. I think one has to look at each case on its merits, and I'll come to some of these questions next week on Tuesday. But it's a very, very important, a very good question, I think.
Paul, I think I'll recognize myself. I think one of the really good contributions of your talk this evening is its emphasis on the unintended outcomes, unintended consequences of technology. And I think particularly economists often underestimate the uncertainties that people who generate technology, use technology, apply technology, experience on a kind of day-to-day, year-to-year basis. It's very, very difficult to know when you go in a certain direction for basic research or applied research what you're going to get out of that process and what the sort of second and third generation consequences are likely to be. So I think that uncertainty has to play a very large role in the generation of nightmares and the generation of dreams. The question I wanted to pose to you is whether you have a view about what I would call the distinction between mass technology that's available to very large numbers of people to apply and use, that's available to very large numbers of people at a very low cost, as opposed to technologies which you might think of as more elitist or collective technologies, in which their cost and their usage restricts the application of the technology to governments, perhaps to religious movements, but to collective groups, and whether you see one form of technology or another, mass technology or elitist technology, as inherently more nightmare prone.
Its impact on income distribution? Or?
Well, I was just thinking, using the concept of nightmare very broadly. Are mass technologies inherently more productive of dreams than technologies which, say, governments typically use and apply exclusively?
Well, I think I would come back to Bruce's point, I would think this is not so much a question of the nature of the technology, of our social and human arrangements, of its impact. In principle, a technology can be quite unequalizing, say, but you could make, you could produce remedies for this in various dimensions by looking after and paying attention to those who would otherwise suffer from this. So I think it's very much a question. I think I'll come to some of these questions next time, but I think it's a very important question. I would agree. What is the impact of various types of technology on income distribution, on equality of opportunity, or equality of achievement, etc. I think that is not so much, I would have thought, a matter of the technology itself as of the social and human arrangements that you make for it. Wouldn't you say so? I think so. Sorry.
So, to hear the end of the story, join us same time, same place, a week from today.
Thank you.